November 13th, 1974, 3:15 a.m., 112, Ocean Avenue, Amityville, New York. Inside a large Dutch colonial house on the water, 6 people are sleeping. A father, a mother, 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, ages 9 to 18. In one of the bedrooms upstairs, a 23-year-old man picks up a .35 caliber Marlin rifle. He walks to his parents' bedroom first. 2 shots, both dead. Then his brother's room, 2 more dead. Then his sister's room, 2 more. 6 people, 6 bullets, all within 15 minutes. Here's what makes it strange. The house is not soundproofed. The rifle is loud, deafeningly loud. The neighbors' houses are close enough to hear a raised voice, let alone gunfire. But nobody woke up. Not the siblings in the next rooms. Not the neighbors outside. Every victim was found face down in their bed. No signs of struggle. No defensive wounds. As if they'd been sedated, or as if something had held them in place. The killer, Ronald DeFeo Jr., known as Butch, would later claim he heard voices commanding him to do it, that the house made him do it. 13 months later, a new family would move into 112 Ocean Avenue. George and Kathy Lutz, with Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage. They would last 28 days. When they fled, they claimed the house was possessed, that demons lived in the walls, that they barely escaped with their lives. Their story became a book, then a movie, then a franchise. The Amityville Horror became one of the most famous haunted house stories in American history. But here's what almost nobody talks about. The Lutzes made millions of dollars. The lawyer who represented the killer admitted they made the whole story up over wine, and every family that lived in the house after the Lutzes said nothing ever happened. So what's the truth? Was 112 Ocean Avenue really haunted? Or was it the scene of the greatest horror hoax in American history? A hoax built on the graves of 6 real murder victims. Title card: The Amityville Horror, the real story. The house. Let's start with the house itself, because the house is where everything begins and ends. 112. Ocean Avenue was built in 1927, a large 3-story Dutch colonial with distinctive quarter-moon windows that looked like eyes staring out at the street. It sat on the Amityville River in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood on Long Island. Not a mansion, not a shack, just a nice family home in a nice family neighborhood. In 1965, Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his wife Louise bought the house. They had 5 children: Ronald Jr., called Butch, Dawn, Allison, Marc, and John Matthew. Ronald Sr. worked for his father-in-law's successful Buick dealership in Brooklyn. The family was comfortable, not rich but doing well. From the outside, they looked like the American dream. But inside 112 Ocean Avenue, things were different. The father, Ronald DeFeo Sr., was, by all accounts, a violent man. He beat his wife. He beat his children. Neighbors reported hearing screaming matches that lasted for hours. Butch, the oldest son, bore the worst of it. Ronald Sr. had a temper that could ignite over nothing. A spilled drink, a door left open, a wrong word. When it did, his fists came out. Butch grew up watching his father brutalize his mother, grew up being brutalized himself, and somewhere along the way, something broke inside him. The son. By his early 20s, Butch DeFeo was a mess. He was overweight, angry, and addicted to heroin. He'd been fired from multiple jobs, including one at his grandfather's dealership where he was caught stealing. He had a criminal record: petty theft, drug possession. He carried a .35 caliber rifle around the house for protection, though from what, nobody was sure. And he hated his father. The two fought constantly, screaming matches that turned physical. Butch once pulled a gun on his father during an argument. Ronald Sr. called the police but later dropped the charges. The family was trapped in a cycle of violence and dysfunction, and 112 Ocean Avenue was the pressure cooker where it all festered. Something was going to break. The only question was when. November 13th, 1974. The night of November 12th, 1974 seemed normal enough. The DeFeo family had dinner together. Ronald Sr. and Louise went to bed around 11 p.m. The children followed shortly after. Butch stayed up late, as he often did. At some point in the early morning hours, police would later estimate around 3:15 a.m., he picked up his Marlin rifle. What happened next is a matter of public record, documented in crime scene photos, autopsy reports, and trial testimony. Butch walked into his parents' bedroom on the 2nd floor. His father was lying on his stomach, asleep. Butch fired twice, once into his back, once into his neck. Ronald DeFeo Sr. died instantly. Louise DeFeo woke up. She managed to turn partially before Butch fired 2 shots into her. One bullet struck her in the face. She died next to her husband. Then Butch went to his brother's room. Marc, 12, and John Matthew, 9, shared a bedroom. Both were shot once in the back while lying face down. Both died instantly. Next was his sister's room. Dawn, 18, and Allison, 13. Both shot once in the head while lying face down in their beds. 6 people, 6 bullets, all dead. The autopsies would later reveal that all victims had been shot at close range while lying in their beds. All were found face down. None showed signs of struggle. The house was silent. No one in the neighboring homes heard the shots. No one called the police. No one came to help. By 3:30 a.m., Butch DeFeo was the only person alive at 112 Ocean Avenue. The aftermath. Butch showered. He collected the shell casings. He hid the rifle and the bloody clothing in a storm drain 2 blocks away. Then he went to work. Yes, work, as if nothing had happened. Around 6 p.m. that evening, nearly 15 hours after the murders, Butch ran into a local bar called Henry's, screaming that someone had killed his family. He led a group of friends back to 112 Ocean Avenue. They found the bodies exactly as Butch had left them that morning. The police arrived. The house was sealed. The investigation began. And almost immediately, the story started to fall apart. The lies begin. Butch told police that he'd come home around 6 p.m. and found everyone dead. He claimed he'd been at work all day, but his co-workers said he'd left work early. His timeline didn't match the evidence. And when detectives searched the storm drain, they found the rifle, the shell casings, and Butch's bloody clothes. Within 24 hours, Butch confessed. Sort of. He admitted to killing his family, but claimed he'd been commanded to do it by voices in his head. He said the house made him do it, that there was an evil presence in 112 Ocean Avenue that controlled him. His lawyer, William Weber, initially tried an insanity defense, but the prosecution's psychiatrists found Butch sane and aware of his actions. The trial lasted a month. On November 21, 1975, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, 25 years to life on each count. He would die in prison in 2021, still claiming the house made him do it. But the real question that haunted investigators wasn't whether Butch killed his family. The evidence was overwhelming. The real question was, why didn't anyone wake up? The unanswered questions. Think about it. A .35 caliber Marlin rifle is loud. It's not a silenced pistol. It's a hunting rifle designed to bring down large game at distance. Inside a house at night, the sound would be deafening. Yet somehow, Butch fired 6 shots in 3 different bedrooms over the course of at least several minutes, and nobody woke up. His brothers, sleeping in the next room, didn't hear their parents being shot. His sisters didn't hear their brothers being shot. The neighbors, whose houses were close enough to hear conversations through open windows, didn't hear anything, and every single victim was found face down, as if they'd been asleep when shot. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no indication they'd tried to run or fight back. The official explanation from police was that the family was used to loud arguments and might have dismissed the sound, or that perhaps Butch used a pillow to muffle the shots. But forensics found no pillow fibers in the wounds, and the loud argument explanation doesn't account for why the children didn't wake up after hearing their parents being killed. Some investigators theorized that Butch had drugged the family, but the autopsies found no sedatives in their systems. Others suggested that Dawn, the oldest daughter, might have helped Butch kill the family, which would explain why her body position was slightly different. She was lying on her stomach, but with her hands beneath her, as if she'd been holding herself up before being shot. But this theory was never proven. The truth is, we don't know, and that mystery, that gap in the logical explanation, is what left the door open for everything that came after. Because when the Lutz family moved into 112 Ocean Avenue 13 months later, they knew about the unsolved questions. They knew about the voices Butch claimed to hear. They knew about the strange, silent massacre. And whether intentionally or not, they built their story on that foundation of real horror. December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz were looking for a deal. George was a land surveyor, Kathy a homemaker with 3 young children from her previous marriage. They wanted a big house on the water, but couldn't afford Long Island's usual prices. Then they found 112 Ocean Avenue. The house had been on the market for over a year. Everyone in Amityville knew what had happened there. The realtor was legally required to disclose the murders. The asking price had been slashed to $80,000, well below market value for a waterfront property that size. The Lutzes didn't care about the history. or at least that's what they said. They toured the house. They saw the bloodstains still visible on the floors. They knew 6 people had died there, and they bought it anyway. On December 18, 1975, exactly 13 months and 5 days after the DeFeo murders, the Lutz family moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. They would claim to last exactly 28 days. The 28 days. According to the Lutzes, the horror began almost immediately. George, a non-religious man, suddenly felt compelled to have the house blessed. They called a local Catholic priest, Father Ralph Pecoraro, who agreed to perform the blessing. The Lutzes claimed that during the blessing, Father Pecoraro heard a deep voice command him to get out. The priest allegedly became violently ill and left immediately, later advising the family not to use the second-floor bedroom where the voice had come from, the same room where Ron and Louise DeFeo had been murdered. Father Pecoraro would later give conflicting statements about whether this actually happened. The Lutzes claimed that strange things began happening immediately after the blessing. Swarms of flies appeared in the house despite it being winter doors, and windows opened and slammed shut on their own green slime, oozed from the walls and keyholes. A crucifix on the wall turned upside down. Kathy suffered nightmares about the murders, seeing them as they happened. George woke up every night at 3:15 a.m., the exact time of the murders. The children's personalities changed. The youngest, Missy, claimed to have an invisible friend named Jody, who was a pig. George saw glowing red eyes staring at him from outside the house. They discovered a small hidden room in the basement with red walls, a secret room that wasn't on the house plans. The activity escalated. According to George, he became obsessed with the fireplace, keeping it burning constantly and refusing to leave the house. He stopped bathing, stopped working, and became violent and withdrawn. Kathy claimed she was physically transformed, aging years in a matter of days. Their financial situation collapsed. George wasn't working, and they were burning through their savings trying to keep warm in a house that remained freezing cold despite the roaring fire. Finally, on January 14, 1976, 28 days after moving in, the Lutzes claimed they fled the house in the middle of the night, leaving almost everything behind. They drove to Kathy's mother's house and never returned to 112 Ocean Avenue. They left behind their furniture, their belongings, and $60,000 in equity. And then they started talking. The book deal. This is where the story gets interesting. Shortly after fleeing the house, George Lutz contacted William Weber, Ronald DeFeo's defense attorney. Yes, the same William Weber who had represented Butch in the murder trial. The same lawyer who had used the voices made him do it defense. Weber saw an opportunity. He proposed that he and the Lutzes write a book together about the true haunting of 112 Ocean Avenue. The book would help support a new appeal for DeFeo. If the house really was evil, maybe it really had controlled Butch, and it would make everyone involved a lot of money. According to Weber's later testimony, he sat down with George and Kathy Lutz over several bottles of wine, and they created the story of the Amityville horror together. They took real details from the DeFeo murders, the 3:15 a.m. timeline, the strange lack of noise, Butch's claims about voices, and wove them into a narrative of supernatural terror. Weber later stated in a 1979 interview, "We created this horror story over many bottles of wine that George was drinking. We were really playing with each other. We were creating something the public wanted to hear about." The Lutzes denied this. They insisted every word was true. In September 1977, The Amityville Horror, A True Story, by Jay Anson was published. It became an immediate bestseller, spending 42 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. The book was marketed as nonfiction, as a true account of a real haunting, and America believed it. The Lutzes became famous overnight. Talk show appearances, newspaper interviews. They were the family who survived the most haunted house in America. In 1979, the book was adapted into a movie starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder. It grossed over $86 million at the box office, one of the highest-grossing independent films of all time. The Lutzes made millions. William Weber made money. The publisher made money. The only people who didn't benefit were the 6 DeFeo victims, whose real murders were now buried under layers of fiction and exploitation. But here's the question nobody was asking in 1977. If the house was really haunted, why didn't anything happen to the families who lived there after the Lutzes? Because people did live there, for decades, and they had a very different story to tell. The Cromarties family. In March 1977, just 2 months after the Lutzes fled, and while the Amityville horror book was being written, A new family moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. Jim and Barbara Cromartie bought the house for $55,000. They knew about the murders. They knew about the Lutz story, which was already spreading through the media. They didn't care. Jim Cromartie was a former Marine. Barbara was a no-nonsense woman who thought the whole haunting story was ridiculous. They had 4 children and needed a big house on the water, and 112 Ocean Avenue was available at a price they could afford. So they moved in. The press followed immediately. Reporters camped outside. Curiosity seekers drove by at all hours. Tour buses started, including the house, on their routes. The Cromarties were furious, not at ghosts, but at the invasion of their privacy. They granted one interview to the media, and what they said was blunt. Nothing weird has happened here. No voices, no slime, no flies, no demons. The only thing that bothers us is the people outside taking pictures and the reporters who won't leave us alone. They lived in the house for 10 years. 10 years. Not 28 days. 10 years. And according to the Cromarties, nothing paranormal ever happened. Not once. Barbara Cromartie later told reporters, "The only problem with the house was the legacy the Lutzes left behind. We couldn't have a normal life because everyone thought we were living in a haunted house." The family eventually sold the house in 1987, not because of ghosts, but because they were tired of the attention. The next owners. After the Cromarties, the house changed hands several times. Each family that lived there reported the same thing. Nothing happened. No voices, no slime, no red-eyed pigs, no demonic possessions. The biggest problems the families faced were tourists, trespassers, and the occasional reporter looking for a Halloween special. In 1997, the house was sold to Brian Wilson, no relation to the Beach Boys musician, who still owns it as of this writing. Wilson has lived there for over 2 decades. When asked about paranormal activity, Wilson's response has been consistent. The only horror here is the curiosity seekers who won't leave the property alone. The house itself has changed since 1976. The iconic quarter-moon eye windows were replaced with standard windows to make the house less recognizable. The address was changed from 112 Ocean Avenue to 108 Ocean Avenue to deter tourists. But the house remains occupied by normal people, living normal lives. Which raises the obvious question. If the house was possessed in 1976, why did the demons leave when the Lutzes did? William Weber speaks. In 1979, the same year the Amityville horror movie was released, William Weber, the lawyer who represented Ronald DeFeo and who helped the Lutzes craft their story, gave an interview that shattered the entire narrative. He admitted it, all of it. According to Weber, he and the Lutzes had concocted the haunting story as a publicity stunt to help DeFeo's appeal and to make money through book and movie deals. Weber stated, "I know this book is a hoax. We created this horror story over many bottles of wine." He described how they pulled details from the actual DeFeo murders, the 3:15 a.m. timeline, the creepy basement, the layout of the house, and embellished them with classic haunted house tropes: flies, slime, voices, demonic possession. The formula was simple. Take real horror, 6 murdered people, and add fake horror, demons and ghosts, to create a story that felt authentic because it was rooted in truth. Weber claimed that the plan fell apart when the Lutzes cut him out of the book deal and kept all the profits for themselves. That's when he decided to go public with the truth. The Lutzes, of course, denied everything. George Lutz called Weber a liar and insisted that every detail in the book was true. Kathy supported her husband's claims, but Weber had evidence. He had notes from their meetings. He had early drafts of the story where details changed between versions. He had testimony showing that George Lutz had researched demonology and haunted house literature before crafting his narrative. The case went to court. The lawsuits Weber sued the Lutzes for breach of contract, claiming they'd agreed to split the book profits and then cut him out. The Lutzes countersued, claiming Weber was defaming them by calling their story a hoax. The legal battle revealed damaging information about the Lutzes' credibility, financial motive. The Lutzes were in serious financial trouble when they moved into the house. George's business was failing. They were behind on bills. The book deal offered a way out, and it worked. They made an estimated $300,000 from the book alone, plus additional income from movie rights, interviews, and speaking engagements. Contradictory statements. George and Kathy's accounts of what happened in the house changed over time. Early interviews described relatively minor incidents, cold spots, strange feelings. Later interviews, especially after the book was published, included increasingly dramatic claims: levitation, physical transformations, demonic attacks. The priest's testimony, Father Ralph Pecoraro, the priest who allegedly blessed the house and heard the voice say, "Get out," gave conflicting statements. In some interviews, he supported the Lutz's claims. In others, he downplayed his experience or refused to comment. Under oath, he admitted he couldn't definitively say what he'd experienced was supernatural. The paranormal investigators, Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigators who visited the house and confirmed it was haunted, had a financial stake in the story. They wrote their own book about Amityville and made money from lectures and media appearances. Their credibility was questionable. They were in the business of finding hauntings, not debunking them. The children's testimony, Kathy's 3 children from her previous marriage later gave interviews as adults. Their memories of the 28 days contradicted many of George and Kathy's claims. One of the children admitted that while strange things happened, much of what appeared in the book was exaggerated or invented. The lawsuits were eventually settled out of court. The Lutzes kept their money. Weber got some compensation, and the official story remained that the Amityville horror was a true account, at least according to the marketing. But the damage was done. Serious researchers, journalists, and investigators had dissected the story and found it full of holes. By the mid-1980s, most people who looked into the case critically concluded that the Amityville horror was a hoax, a very profitable hoax built on the graves of the DeFeo family. The victims. Let's take a moment to remember the people who actually died at 112 Ocean Avenue. Ronald DeFeo Sr., 43 years old. A violent man with a temper, yes, but he didn't deserve to be shot in the back while he slept. He had siblings, parents, friends, a life that ended in a pool of blood in his own bed. Louise DeFeo, 43 years old. A woman trapped in an abusive marriage, trying to hold her family together. She woke up to see her husband dead and her son holding a rifle. Those were her last moments. Dawn DeFeo, 18 years old, just graduated from high school. She had her whole life ahead of her. Instead, she was shot in the head by her older brother. Allison DeFeo, 13 years old, a child, a middle schooler with friends, hobbies, dreams. Gone. Marc DeFeo, 12 years old, a little boy who loved baseball, shot in the back while sleeping next to his younger brother. John Matthew DeFeo, 9 years old, the youngest, a third grader. He died not understanding why his brother was killing him. These 6 people, flawed, complicated, real human beings, were murdered in one of the most brutal family annihilations in American history, and their legacy became a ghost story, a story where the house is the villain, where demons and ghosts overshadow the actual crime, where people visit not to mourn the victims, but to take selfies in front of the Amityville horror house. The DeFeo murders should have been remembered as a tragedy, as a case study in family violence, untreated mental illness, and the cycle of abuse. Instead, they became a haunted house attraction. The industry. The Amityville horror didn't end with the first book and movie. It became a franchise. There have been over 20 movies bearing the Amityville name. Most have nothing to do with the original house or the DeFeo murders. They're just generic horror films using the Amityville brand to sell tickets. There have been dozens of books, some claiming to be true accounts, others admitting they're fiction. There are documentaries, podcasts, YouTube videos, and paranormal investigation shows, all profiting from the Amityville story. The house itself has become a tourist destination. Despite the current owner's attempts to maintain privacy, people still drive by, take photos, and sometimes trespass. Every Halloween, the media runs retrospectives on America's most haunted house. It's an industry, a business, built on 6 corpses and a lie. George and Kathy Lutz. George Lutz defended the Amityville story until his death in 2006. He gave interviews, appeared on paranormal shows, and wrote additional books about his experiences. He insisted that every word was true, that the house was evil, and that his family barely escaped with their lives. Kathy Lutz, who remarried after divorcing George, was more circumspect in later years. She gave fewer interviews and seemed uncomfortable with the continued attention. She died in 2004. Their children have given conflicting accounts. Some support the haunting story. Others have admitted that much of it was exaggerated or fabricated. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Did the Lutzes experience something strange in the house? Maybe. Old houses make noises. The trauma of knowing 6 people died there could create psychological effects. Suggestion is powerful. But did they experience demonic possession, levitation, and attacks from a red-eyed pig demon? No, almost certainly not. What they experienced was an opportunity, a chance to turn tragedy into profit. And they took it. What we know for sure. Let's separate fact from fiction. Fact. On November 13, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered 6 members of his family with a rifle while they slept. Fact. The case had strange elements. The lack of noise, the victims' positions, that remain unexplained. Fact. DeFeo claimed voices made him do it, but was found legally sane and convicted. Fact. The Lutz family moved into the house in December 1975 and left in January 1976. Fact. The Lutzes wrote a book claiming demonic activity drove them out. Fact. William Weber, DeFeo's lawyer, admitted helping the Lutzes fabricate the story. Fact. Multiple families have lived in the house since 1976 and reported no paranormal activity. Fact. The Lutzes made hundreds of thousands of dollars from books, movies, and media appearances. Everything else, the demons, the flies, the slime, the possession, is disputed, unverified, and most likely invented. The real horror. The real horror of Amityville isn't supernatural. It's human. It's a young man so damaged by abuse that he murdered his entire family. It's a couple so desperate for money that they exploited those murders for profit. It's an entertainment industry that turned tragedy into a commodity. It's a society that would rather believe in demons than confront the real evil that happens every day in ordinary homes. Violence, abuse, neglect, and the failure to intervene. 112. Ocean Avenue wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by what humans are capable of doing to each other. And that's more terrifying than any horror movie. Today, 112 Ocean Avenue, now renumbered as 108, sits quietly on the Amityville River. The current owner lives there full-time. The windows have been changed. The address has been changed. But the house remains. It's just a house. Old, yes. Historic, certainly. But not haunted. The real haunting is what we project onto it. The stories we tell. The fear we manufacture. Ronald DeFeo Jr. died in prison in March 2021 at the age of 69. He spent nearly 50 years behind bars, always claiming the house made him do it. He never expressed genuine remorse for what he did. The DeFeo family has no memorial, no public monument. Most people don't even know their names. But everyone knows the Amityville horror. And maybe that's the final tragedy. We remember the lie. We forget the victims. We made a tourist attraction out of a murder house. We turned real horror into entertainment. And we keep buying tickets. The question. So here's the question I want you to think about. Why do we prefer the ghost story to the truth? Why is it easier to believe in demons than to acknowledge that a young man, damaged by years of abuse, failed by mental health systems, enabled by a family that knew he was dangerous, could walk through his house with a rifle and execute 6 people? Why is the house made him do it more comforting than we failed to stop him? Because if the house is evil, then it's not our fault. If demons exist, then we don't have to look at the real monsters. Domestic violence, untreated mental illness, systemic failures. The Amityville horror is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid a harder truth. And as long as we keep telling it, we're not learning the lesson that 6 deaths should have taught us. That the real horror is always human. And it's happening right now, in houses just like 112 Ocean Avenue, all across America. The ghosts aren't in the walls. They're in our willingness to look away.